All right. This question comes from computer science student River Bat. Thank you for your question. And if you've got a question, just you can drop it in the comments and we'll talk about it. Right? We'll make a video. I have a question about mistakes. What sorts of mistakes do you think game developers make that don't get enough attention and or don't get talked about enough? More so, what do you think we should all probably be more aware of as game developers? This is going to be more from my experience, but I get very caught up in the game mechanics, the making process. I get very caught up in it, and I think it's partly because that it's that process that I really enjoy, right? And you might be the same way. That's figuring out how can I translate what's in my head and get it out onto the screen and have it interact in a way that I'm thinking it should interact. Like that process is, to me, like extremely addicting, and part of why I love doing this thing. I think it's real easy to get caught up in that, and you lose sight of maybe what the overarching goal of your project or your game or your experience, which I'll jump into that in a second. How is the end user going to experience this? How are they going to take this thing that you've made, and what's their reaction going to be? So I feel that it's very easy to get caught up in the developer world and lose sight of the end user world. And your game, your project, if it's meant for other people, like the goal is to elicit some kind of emotional response in some way, right? It's art. That's what art's for. If you're making music, if you're making a movie, if you're making a TV show, if you're a comedian, if you're any of those things, any of these artistic forms, if you're painting, whatever it is, you're trying to elicit an emotional response in the viewer, or in the case of games, someone who's actively interacting with the art, which is, what makes gaming so unique. And really, gaming is becoming such an archaic term for some of this stuff, right? I spent a little bit of time in the VR world, and if you've been in the VR world or you've ever talked to anyone who's within that development space, the way they sort of approach this the same thing, right? Making a game, it's very different. It's more making an experience and not a game. I think in part because VR has brought so many different people from different walks of life, people that aren't traditional gamers, or people that have no programming background. They're an artist in their own right in some other form. And there's these things that it's really interesting to me, but you see these VR, made in Unity, made in Unreal, made in game engines, but they're showing up at film festivals, right? Because they're these interactive video it's such a unique thing. It's hard to even describe it, but it's like a play that you interact with virtually. There are, Venn diagram, cross section of what that is and what a video game is, but people within that world, they refer to these things as experiences because they know that the most important part of this is how the viewer is going to react to what they're making. And yeah, I feel that game development gets so caught up in, mechanics and how the code's supposed to look. Your game, your project, the thing you're making is supposed to elicit emotional response. Like that's the baseline, bottom line goal for the most part. And whether that's making someone feel like they're a superhero, or making them feel really, really smart because they're figuring out all these puzzles, making them feel freaking terrified because it's a horror game, it's all about basic human emotion. And so if you're sitting making your game and you get caught up in the programming, and I feel that way, I get caught up in it, I get caught up in the mechanics, you cannot forget what the end goal is. And that is the person that is playing this needs to have some kind of emotional response. I feel that's a huge mistake that people make. And it's not constantly caring about what the end user is going to do with this, how they're going to react. The answer to that is to think about it, right? To think about how is the player going to react to this level or this event or this game mechanic. Like, what is this going to make them feel? Is it going to make them feel excited? Is it going to be cool that they're like, wow, this is really powerful. I can be super creative with it. You have those moments and you can pinpoint the aspects of your game or your project or whatever you're making that is going to elicit those responses, and you lean into those. You lean into things that are going to make someone feel a certain way. And if you're really good at it, if you're really, really good at it, then you can control how they feel, right? You can guide them along that path. Like, why is why is Nintendo so good, right? They're not the most sophisticated visually. They're not they're not reinventing the wheel every time that they make something. But that moment in Breath of the Wild where you come out of the cave and you see this huge expanse, right? Why did they do that? Why did they have that cinematic experience there? Because it's like, holy crap, look at all this stuff that I can go, right? And you're like, whoa, that's really cool. That's the emotional response that they're looking for with the new Super Mario Wonder, right? 2D platformer, nothing new, been done 100 million times. Why is it so good, right? Because every single level is completely different. And there's this new mechanic that pops up and you're like, whoa, that's cool. And you have to figure it out. It's these surprise, it's changing expectations, it's all of these things because they're thinking about how is the player going to respond to this. And that's the most important thing. That's the answer, right? If you have something that people are going to go whoa about or be surprised about, or it's going to scare the crap out of them, you got something. Don't get caught up in developer world, developer mind. You got to think about other people. How are other people going to respond to this? And I mean, play testing, it's testing, seeing what people think about it, how they play it, how they interact. People could play your game completely differently than how you think they will because they didn't make the thing. It reminds me of, I keep going back to the VR thing. Gorilla Tag, ugly. It's an ugly game. It looks terrible. I pop up a screenshot of it if you're not familiar, but it's basically you swing your arms around and you move around like a gorilla, kind of. I think at one point, if it's not still like the most popular VR game because you're interacting with people and that interaction and those mechanics create a unique experience that people cannot get enough of. And there you go. That's it. Beat Saber, same thing. I mean, what a brilliant idea, right? You take music, which is already this own addictive thing in its own right. You connect that to rhythm and music, and you give the person lightsabers. I mean, it's brilliant, genius idea, because the experience is so unique and people love it. Yeah, focus on the end user, the player, the person who's going to experience what you're creating. Think about them throughout the entire process. Don't get stuck in your own head.